A developing story we're following. The man accused in the mass murder that got nationwide attention goes to court to get a change of venue. It happened at a home on Leicester Street. Jessie Dotson is accused of killing 6 people, including 2 children, and stabbing 3 other children who managed to survive. He faces the death penalty if convicted. Today, Dotson and his lawyers were in court pleading their case. News Channel 3's Stephanie Skurlock is live with what happened. Stephanie?
Well, April, the judge heard arguments from both sides in this case today in this change of venue motion. Jessie Dotson and his lawyers want to have a jury selected from outside Shelby County to hear his case. Jessie Dotson is escorted into court by 2 Shelby County deputy jailers. Soon after, his lawyers make a case for why the jurors who decide his fate should come from outside of West Tennessee. Defense lawyers say a huge amount of publicity has prejudiced potential jurors. They cited the cable network show The First 48 that aired the confession Dotson gave police, as well as the many news stories done on Dotson and the crime.
We see the questions that people ask us about the case that are different than the questions we've seen and the number of cameras here today. This is just a different kind of case, and of course is getting a different kind of attention.
Prosecutors say publicity is expected because it was such a serious crime. They pointed out the number of broadcast and print stories dwindled significantly after the first month of Dotson's arrest. There was a slight surge after the First 48 ran its episode featuring Dotson, but since then, they say, there's been little publicity.
The crime was committed here, and I think that they could be fair and impartial and hold the state to its burden and expect some proof and not just rush to a judgment based on a news story. I think that that's not being fair to the people in Shelby County.
Developing story of the Leicester Street murder trial, a setback today for defense attorneys representing accused killer Jessie Dotson. A judge ruled the guardian for 3 young survivors of the attack does not have to allow the defense to interview the children. It was a statement from one of those victims that led to Dotson's confession. But will the children take the witness stand when their uncle faces a jury? On Your Side, investigator Scott Knoll is live with details. Scott.
Well, Claudia, at the time of the attack, the oldest surviving victim was 9, the youngest only about 2 months old. Well, 2 years have passed, but even now prosecutors say they have serious concerns about putting them on the witness stand. As prosecutors and defense attorneys sort through 2,400 photos and nearly 300 names of potential witnesses, there are 3 people who could be key to convicting Jessie Dotson. They are the only 3 survivors of the vicious March 2008 attack inside 722 Leicester Street. But their combined ages now just 20 years old.
The concerns are that, how will they respond to being on a witness stand more so than anything else, what they do when they get on there as far as what they recall, what they remember, because again, these are children who have been through a trauma.
In fact, neither side seems to know what to expect from the children. Defense attorneys asked to interview them before September's trial, but the children's appointed guardian said no.
There have been some real issues with how the children were interviewed, what they have said on different occasions, and those are all things that the jury's going to have to understand.
It was a statement made by the now 11-year-old survivor and played on A&E's The First 48 that police used to get a confession out of Dotson, known to family as Junior.
A child called your name, Junior.
Today, Dotson's defense said it plans to bring in a psychologist specializing in the accuracy of children's statements to watch the kids that they're called to testify. So far, prosecutors won't say for sure whether or not that will happen.
There are concerns, but again, those are the things you have to do when you put on a trial like this. They were victims and they were witnesses, and so we'll look at that and make those determinations, but surely there are concerns.
Of the 286 names on the witness list, prosecutors expect to call between 50 and 60 to testify during next month's trial. We're told that testimony could last anywhere between 2 weeks and a full month. Reporting live, I'm Scott Knoll, WREG News Channel 3.
Tonight's top story, jury selection in the trial of accused Leicester Street murderer Jessie Dotson starts in just a couple of hours. 12 jurors and 4 alternates from Nashville are going to be selected. The actual trial will be held here in Shelby County. Dotson is accused of killing 6 people, including his brother and 2 children. And even though he's killed before, the jury will not be given that information.
On Friday, both sides met with criminal court judge James Beasley to decide what evidence can and cannot be introduced during the trial. Dotson's accused of stabbing and shooting 6 people to death, including his brother Cecil and 2 children. Prosecutors will be allowed to mention Dotson was in prison before. They will not be allowed to tell jurors how much time he served or that his previous conviction was for murder.
What's relevant to that and goes to his state of mind is the fact that he was not, under any circumstances after he killed his brother, going back to jail. So you see, in order to prove that, you've got to mention that he had been in jail.
It's public knowledge that Jessie Dotson was convicted of murder back in the early 90s, and the judge has told the state that they can't get into that, and the state knows that, and if a witness was to blurt something like that out, that would probably necessitate a mistrial in a case like this.
3 children survived the March 2008 attack. At least one of them is expected to take the stand. Prosecutors need to prove intent and premeditation to win this case.
And part of that goes into how upset he was with the way his brother was treating him when he was just got out of jail, and even made comments that he was tired of Cecil introducing him to everybody as someone who had been in jail.
Jurors also won't be allowed to see Dotson's confession, which appeared on the television show The First 48. Without the confession and without knowledge of his prior murder conviction, Dotson's attorney stands a better chance convincing the jury that his client didn't commit one of the worst mass murders in Memphis history.
Well, I think it's pretty hard to judge somebody fairly if you know they've been convicted of murder before.
And again, jury selection begins in Nashville starting tomorrow. We'll be there to bring you the latest.
Tonight's top story, jury selection in the Leicester Street Massacre murder trial.
16 people from Nashville will be brought to Memphis to decide Jessie Dotson's fate. Dotson is accused of killing 6 people, including his brother and 2 children, in 2008. Allison Sossaman is in Nashville, where potential jurors are being questioned.
This selection process is taking a long time here at the historic Davidson County Courthouse. The pool of 120 jurors has already been narrowed down with a questionnaire, but now the judge has asked for more jurors because so many have already been eliminated. Jessie Dotson is in the courtroom for the entire process. He seems relaxed, talking with his attorneys, even laughing at times. Judge James Beasley is bringing jurors in by groups and then one at a time. People are being asked if they are available to drop everything and go to Memphis for a trial that could take weeks. The death penalty factor is another one that's excusing jurors. Some people don't believe in it. Others say it's the only punishment fitting for someone convicted of multiple murders. Finally, the reason we're in Nashville to begin with, the news coverage. Too many people knew about the case in Memphis. In addition to the local coverage, the case was featured nationally on A&E's First 48. People filled out questionnaires on these and other topics last month.
In looking at the questionnaires, there's a fair amount of people from the questionnaires have heard about the case, but they can hear about the case. It's whether or not they formed an opinion and whether or not they're able to get rid of that opinion and just listen to the evidence in the trial.
Jurors who made it through this line of questioning were asked to report back to court at 9:30 Thursday morning. In Nashville, Allison Sossman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
Jurors are in for what will likely be a long, unpleasant process. They will be bused to Memphis for the trial that's expected to last 2 to 3 weeks. It will include the gruesome details of this case, including what we've heard are horrific crime scene photos. Some of them involve children. Tonight on ABC 24 Eyewitness News at 5, our top story, dead and injured children. Details of the March 2008 bloodbath at Leicester Street in Memphis are revealed in Shelby County Criminal Court. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dee Griffin.
And I'm Cameron Harper. Witnesses are taking the stand in the Jessie Dotson mass murder trial. Dotson is accused of killing 6 people, 2 children, 4 adults, and trying to kill 3 other kids. Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossman has been in court all day, and she joins us live now. Allison.
Not surprisingly, the two sides are giving 2 very different versions of what happened on Leicester Street. And from the pictures we've seen already, it paints a very disturbing picture.
Hear ye, hear ye. The Honorable Criminal Court Division 10 of Shelby County is now open for the transaction of business pursuant to adjournment.
A 9-year-old rushed to Le Bonheur. This x-ray shows a knife blade inside his skull, an example of the horror left at the home on Leicester Street.
Not 6, but 7. We have 8 victims. We have 8 victims. And then he goes to the final bedroom. And in that bedroom is another dead child.
Neither side denies that Jessie Dotson was in the house when it happened. Prosecutors say he did it and confessed.
After he confesses to one of the worst mass killings in Memphis history, you know what he does? He asks to see his mother.
The defense says we haven't heard the whole story.
He was there when his family was killed. He was there. He hid.
Defense lawyers talked about gang ties and a lack of forensic evidence. Much of the opening arguments revolved around the statements of the 9-year-old survivor of the attack.
Who did this to you? Junior. Uncle Junior.
The defense says it was a different story from the child at first.
Who did this to you and your daddy? A man named Roderick.
Prosecutors say jurors will hear it from the young man himself.
You will hear from CJ. He's scared, but he will do the best he can to tell you who did this to him. Decide if their evidence can answer their theory. It doesn't.
So far, several first responders, firefighters, and EMTs have taken the stand to describe the scene when they arrived there. Right now, the first homicide investigator on the scene, Sergeant Anthony Mullins, is giving his testimony. Now, while they were investigating this case, cameras from the reality cop show First 48 were following them around at the time. A taped confession from Dotson that aired on the program has already been thrown out of this trial. Coming up at 6, hear how defense attorneys are using those cameras as part of their case for creating reasonable doubt. Live at the Criminal Justice Center, Allison Sosman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
Got a chilling walkthrough of the home on Leicester Street where 6 people were murdered. On day 2 of the Jessie Dotson murder trial, police described the bloody house when they arrived and entered the scene of the worst mass murder in Memphis history. Kevin Holmes spent the day in court. He is live outside the Criminal Justice Center in downtown Memphis. Kevin.
Dee, what they saw today is a lot of evidence, more than 100 pieces and counting, some of it very graphic. Everything from bloody rooms to weapons to even the bathtub where the 9-year-old survivor was found with a blade stuck in his skull. Tonight, at least one homicide detective calls this one of the most troubling scenes he's ever witnessed. Day 2 of testimony in the Jessie Dotson murder trial ended
the ceiling near the fan housing
the same way it began, with homicide detective Tony Mullins.
The pillow in which we found a knife blade 67A.
Mark exhibit number 107. Mark exhibit 109.
Going over more than 140 pieces of evidence. Bloody knives, boards, bloody furniture, everything investigators found when they arrived at 722 Leicester in March 2008.
The mini blinds was another knife blade. A fan on the floor next to that, a bloody pillow.
Throughout the day, prosecutors and police used models and drawings describing what the home looked like after the murder. Diagrams showing where the bodies were found. The judge, jury, family members, and Jessie Dotson himself all watched, some visibly disturbed.
He's seen him before. He's seen him before, and I think anytime you see a family member of yours who has been murdered, it's tough to look at it.
Dotson's attorneys aren't disputing what was found and where, but they are disputing who's responsible, as they did in day 1.
Hopefully they'll finish tomorrow and we'll get a chance to talk to their witness.
And when that time comes, attorney Gerald Scon says, be prepared.
I certainly think there's a perception the public has from you guys, basically, from the last 2.5 years and what's been reported and what hasn't been reported. And sometimes what you hear in a courtroom is much different than what has been reported for the last couple of years. Come back tomorrow, you'll find out.
And we will be there throughout the entire trial. I want to mention Jessie Dotson seemed very upbeat throughout the day. At one point in time, he was actually seen smiling. Now, when we asked his attorney responded that's because he's been looking forward to this day for 2.5 years, and he's just happy that this has finally come to trial. Also expected to take the stand in the near future, former homicide detective Tony Armstrong, and we're also told one of the surviving children is expected to testify. Live at the Criminal Justice Center in downtown Memphis, Kevin Holmes, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
Allison Sosman was in court for all of it and is live with what happened. Allison.
Testimony has wrapped up for tonight. Sergeant Anthony Mullins spent the entire day on the stand going through all the evidence. He said he's investigated 600 to 700 homicides in his career, and he's never seen this much evidence. Family members of the victims filed into the courtroom through tight security. Pictures of their loved ones were tough to see, especially those that reveal how they were found.
Which is consistent with all the blood coming from an arterial wound. In every heartbeat, you're gushing blood out. That indicates to me the pants are up when the wound occurs, and they're not pulled down till afterwards.
The scene on Leicester Street was a gruesome one, with 6 people murdered. It's a complicated one. The prosecutors and police are using models and drawings to describe what it looked like.
This is item number 6.
The FBI helped build this scale model of the home. Homicide investigator Sergeant Anthony Mullins walked jurors through it. This diagram shows the positions of the dead bodies found. Numbers mark the places where pieces of evidence were discovered.
It is a spent projectile, brass in color.
Bloody couch cushions show the spot where Shindri Roberson was killed. Jessie Dotson watched, showing no emotion. Sergeant Mullins shows the spots where a bullet went through a pillow.
Showing 3 different defects, and then this defect on the back with the stuffing coming out.
Showing the places where all the adults were shot, all the children beaten and stabbed.
This is the larger of the 2 knife blades that was found in the tub.
And defense attorneys say they are anxious to cross-examine Sergeant Anthony Mullins. They told me they've been waiting 2.5 years to talk to him. It looks like that will happen tomorrow. Live at the Criminal Justice Center, Allison Sossaman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossaman is following the trial, and she's live with what's being revealed in court. Allison?
The lead homicide investigator has been on the stand all day today. He's taking the jury through every single detail, and those details are graphic.
Cecil Dotson, Sr.
Crime scene photos show Jessie Dotson's brother, Cecil Dotson, was killed with a bag of marijuana in his hand. Photos too graphic to show you reveal Shindri Roberson was killed and found with her pants down and crack cocaine on her private parts. Sergeant Anthony Mullins walked jurors through them all.
Obviously, the pants are pulled down to the knees. In this area, this is the crotch area of the pants, and they are saturated, completely soaked with blood.
The prosecution showed the jury photo after photo taken inside the house on Leicester Street. Pictures show knife blades and pieces of wood. A look at the bathtub where the 9-year-old survivor of the attacks was found with a blade stuck in his skull. Sergeant Mullins opened up the evidence one piece at a time and presented it to the jury.
This is also a 380 auto win spent casing recovered on March the 4th.
Bullet by bullet and board by board.
Just 2 pieces of wood.
Even the bloody clothes worn by victims. The jury got a look at it all.
This is the clothing worn by Shindri Roberson during this incident, removed from her at the morgue.
Sergeant Mullins is still on the stand taking jurors through more pictures and pieces of evidence. Yesterday, Sergeant Mullins told jurors that he'd investigated 600 to 700 homicides in his career, and he'd never seen anything like Leicester.
Day 3 of the Leicester Street Massacre trial. Now Jessie Dotson's defense attorneys get their shot at the case's lead investigator. From drug deals to gang punishment, they're putting a lot of theories out there to give jurors reasonable doubt. Allison Sossaman has been covering the trial all week and spoke with Dotson's lawyers about their strategy.
Investigators said it themselves. This was like no crime scene they'd ever seen. It was complicated with a lot of evidence, and it's clear the defense attorneys are using that to their client's advantage.
I think what the jury is beginning to see is there's a tremendous amount of information in this case. We haven't even really broken the surface of it.
After 2 days of Sergeant Anthony Mullins unwrapping and introducing evidence and prosecutors asking questions, the defense got its shot.
Unfortunately, the prosecution theory does not work with the physical evidence. All of these other theories work with the physical evidence. It makes no sense to say one man did this.
3 different caliber bullets found at the crime scene. The defense is pushing the theory there were multiple shooters. They talk about the complexity of the gang hierarchy in Memphis, ties with Vernon and Motley, Craig Pettis. Lawyers for Dotson say his brother Cecil's gang, the Gangster Disciples, ordered a hit on him.
There is evidence that shortly before this happened, Cecil Dotson had reported some other people, called the police and told them they were selling drugs out of an apartment.
Earlier in the day, Sergeant Mullins told the jury the scene had been altered, possibly to look like a gang hit. He said the blood didn't match up with the bodies. The defense also showed pictures to point out one of their theories. They say the camera crew from the first 48 that was following cops around on Leicester Street led to rushed police work and put pressure on them to make a quick arrest. Pictures show the photographer outside and inside the house.
They're making a TV show, as Mr. McAfee said in an opening statement. The show's not called Morally Certain, it's called First 48. So, yeah, I mean, the idea is to arrest somebody within 48 hours.
If this were your family member, would you want them worrying about a television camera or a television show, or would you want them doing their job?
And just before court wrapped up, the defense was entering pictures into evidence. Photos found inside the home. They showed groups of men flashing gang signs. Questioning about those pictures picks back up tomorrow morning. Live in the studio.
Graphic testimony today in the trial of a man accused of murdering 6 people on Leicester Street. Good evening, I'm Dee Griffin.
And I'm Cameron Harper. A lead investigator in the case against Jessie Dotson says the crime scene was staged. Dotson is accused of murdering his brother, 2 young nephews, and 3 others in March of 2008. Eyewitness News reporter Shelvia Dancy explains why investigators question what they found at the crime scene. Shelvia?
Yeah, that investigator says he believes some of the bodies were moved after the killings, and he says the position of those bodies does not match the blood evidence. Memphis Police Sergeant Anthony Mullins says the crime scene here does not add up. The blood found on the carpet and walls tells one story. He says the position of the 6 bodies inside tells another.
What I see with the wounds does not match the position that they're found in. What I'm seeing from some of this blood evidence doesn't match the placement of some of the bodies.
Some of the victims were found with their pants pulled down, with drugs near their private areas or clutched in their hands.
The crack cocaine is barely touching her. That seems placed to me.
He believes this is the man who did it, Jessie Dotson, but he says the crime scene leaves this question.
Is this supposed to be a robbery, or is this supposed to be a drug deal gone bad? There's drugs that, in my opinion, are planted on two victims.
Another thing Mullins questioned, a knife found inside a pillowcase. He says that's one more sign that whoever committed these murders spent some time in the house after the killings. Reporting from downtown, Shelvia Dancy, ABC.
Between Jessie Dotson's lawyer and the judge on day 4 of the Leicester Street Massacre trial. The courtroom fireworks were prompted by questions surrounding the TV cameras from the reality show which captured the cops investigating the 6 murders. Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossaman is here with more on the outburst, and it actually led to an apology to the jury.
It did. Now, you may remember before the trial, Judge James Beasley ruled that a taped confession from Dotson that aired on the show First 48 would be inadmissible in trial. That's because the raw footage was not available. That was a ruling that sided with the defense. But when a defense lawyer brought up the issue in front of the jury today, the judge said he was taking it too far.
If there is a TV camera, and it's wrong by that guy standing right there. That guy's from A&E, isn't it? First 48. We're still continuing the story, aren't we?
As far as I know, yes, sir.
We're filming the rest of the show.
Judge James Beasley made it clear he doesn't take kindly to his courtroom being referred to as anything but a courtroom.
So let's don't talk about this being part of a TV show. You want to ask questions? Let's ask relevant questions.
I am asking
questions. This is not part of a television show, Mr. Skane. Let's move on to something that's relevant.
The judge apologized to the jury and explained that state law allows a camera in the court.
Sometimes I lose my temper, and it's inappropriate. I should not do that.
These trials they're adversarial proceedings. They get hot. They get contested. Sometimes tempers flare, and you know, we all know each other. We're all professionals up here.
What at first looked like a defense attorney's worst nightmare, a confession caught on camera, Dotson's defense attorneys have made just the opposite. After the footage got thrown out, prosecutors said they had plenty of other evidence to convict Dotson. But defense attorneys say they have no idea what that other evidence is. They say cops didn't document the interview with Dotson until months later.
We have never seen a typewritten statement of Jessie Dotson. The entire interview of Jessie Dotson is gone. We were never able to see it, which means we rely on what the police tell us he said at this point.
Lead homicide investigator Sergeant Tony Mullins said he would have written up the interview in his report as soon as possible, but he wasn't the one who talked to Dotson.
I can tell you, this is something I'll never forget. So, the interviews, it may be something they can never forget. And some details of some interviews, you never forget.
We also learned about DNA evidence collected from the crime scene. TBI testing showed none of it came back to Jessie Dotson, but Sergeant Mullins said nothing in that TBI report exonerated Dotson either. Live in the studio, Allison Sossaman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
This was Sergeant Mullins' fourth day on the witness stand. Investigators with the TBI and FBI are expected to testify tomorrow. No DNA taken from the Leicester Street murder scene matched Jessie Dotson. That's the latest surprising testimony from police to come out of Dotson's murder trial. Dotson is accused of murdering 6 people in March of 2008, including his brother, 2 young nephews, and 4 other people. Eyewitness News reporter Shelvia Dancy has been following this trial all week, and she joins us live with the latest from the courthouse. Shelvia.
Yeah, one of the lead investigators in this case says that lack of evidence does not worry him. He says it doesn't mean that Dotson was not at the crime scene.
For information, the investigation, there's no blood of Jessie Dotson found anywhere on the crime scene at 722 Leicester.
Not to my knowledge, no, sir.
That was a point Jessie Dotson's defense attorney drove home again and again. Dotson watched as investigators said they did not find his blood at the crime scene and did not find his blood on the bicycle police believe he used to leave the scene.
There's a very good chance that somebody from that home's DNA or blood would have been on his body, and that blood possibly would have been transferred to the bicycle that he used to leave the house. Is that fair?
But the lead investigator in the case says that lack of DNA evidence is irrelevant.
It becomes irrelevant when the confession matches the scene, when the witness tells you what happens. When all that information matches.
Mullins told jurors the lack of DNA evidence tying Dotson to the scene is not proof that he was not there.
It would be nice if we found a suspect's blood. It would be nice if we found something that was a big red flag that says, go get this person, but we don't always get that.
Jurors also heard about statements police took from children. Mullins said they pointed the finger at Dotson.
Who did this? Uncle Junior. And you talk to Jessie Dotson, Uncle Junior, and he corroborates and confesses twice.
And when defense attorney Gerald Scahan asked questions about the role of the television program The First 48 in this case, and he asked whether the courtroom camera was part of the show, this scene erupted.
So let's don't talk about this being part of a TV show. You want to ask questions? Let's ask relevant questions.
I am asking
questions. This is not part of a television show, Mr. Scahan. Let's move on to something that's relevant.
And Judge Beasley did apologize to jurors later in the trial. Coming up at 6 o'clock, find out more about the DNA evidence collected from the crime scene and the evidence collected from a 2-year-old that raises some disturbing questions that police can't answer right now. Reporting from downtown, Shelvia Dancy, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
News reporter Shelvia Dancy is here now with more on what jurors heard today about the children. Shelvia?
Yeah, police believe the surviving children have helped them answer the biggest question in this case, who did this? But they say DNA evidence collected from the 2 murdered children has simply raised more questions.
Who did this? Uncle Junior. And you talk to Jessie Dotson, Uncle Junior, and he corroborates and confesses twice.
Memphis Police Sergeant Anthony Mullins says the name Uncle Junior led straight to this man, Jessie Dotson. Defense attorneys questioned whether children may have felt intimidated about speaking to police, but Mullins said no.
I know that when formal statements and formal detailed interviews were taken from the children, it was months after the event. Now, how soon is too soon? I can't tell you.
Mullins said police did not record statements the children gave, but the bodies of the murdered children offered clues too. Investigators collected DNA evidence from 2-year-old Cecil Dotson Jr.
And you got the result back that there was sperm inside of the mouth of a 2-year-old.
And saliva on the child's private parts. But Mullins says that evidence is insufficient.
We don't know.
This doesn't tell me enough to make a determination about anything. But I know it doesn't fit anything that I know about this investigation that he was sexually assaulted.
And investigators say collecting DNA from this scene was complicated because there were so many victims. Mullen says he actually believes that some of the bodies were moved after the murders.
Because not only are they related to the Leicester Street victims, they're also related to the accused killer. News Channel 3's Stephanie Skurlock is live downtown at the CJC. Steph?
Well, Richard, you know, sitting in the courtroom today was more like being in a biology class than anything else. All the talk about blood samples and DNA and which kind of DNA you get from that parent or this parent. But one group of folks sitting in that courtroom is looking past all the science of this crime and just waiting on the outcome are members of the Dotson family.
You know, nobody wants that to be the outcome, you know, that a family member could be accused of it, but, you know, you never know. We'll see, you know, after they get through with everything that they have, you know. Right now, it's all in their hands, so, you know, I'm just here for the support.
Christy Kelly is a cousin to most of the victims killed at 722 Leicester Street and to Jessie Dotson, the man on trial for their murders. Prosecutors have said the worst mass murder in Memphis history is domestic in nature.
Do you think that there's enough evidence so far to convict him?
Not so far, you know, not so far. It's his word against theirs right now, so basically that's all they're going off of, you know, so we'll just see in the end, you know.
Kelly is one of the few Dotson family members allowed in the courtroom. Most will be called to testify, so they can't listen to earlier testimony. She was there today as forensic experts talked about all the blood and DNA in the house and how none they tested is actually tied to Jessie Dotson.
It's a coincidence that it's not, you know, with him being on trial and he's being held for the crime, but there's no evidence showing that he was there.
One revelation that came out of the trial is that one of the young victims killed, Cecil Dotson II, had semen in his mouth. Dotson's defense lawyer suggested gangs did the killing and possibly sexually assaulted the child. But the expert says it was not enough to tell whose DNA it was, and the semen had been there a while.
Based on the presumptive test and based upon my microscopic examination, I would conclude that either it happened hours or days earlier, or else there's some other circumstance.
Now, the court has recessed for the day, but it's going to be a short weekend for the juries. You know, they're bussed in from Nashville, but they won't be going home. That is because the judge is holding Saturday court sessions.
Eyewitness News reporter Shelvia Dancy joins us live from the courthouse to explain what jurors heard today. Shelvia.
Yeah, a state forensics examiner told the jurors that he found only a small trace of that DNA evidence.
What I found was not consistent with someone forcing Cecil Dotson II to perform oral sex within minutes of his death.
State forensic examiner Lawrence James says it's hard to tell when that DNA evidence was placed inside the child's mouth.
It's either a person, the perpetrator has very low sperm count, or the incident where the semen was deposited happened days or hours, usually days, prior to the evidence being collected from the victim.
He said the evidence investigators found was tiny.
In this particular case, like I told you, I only observed one sperm cell.
James also talked about the lack of DNA evidence on the bicycle that police believe Dotson used to get away from the crime scene.
Would it surprise you if an individual, let's say, rode a bicycle for a couple of miles and was touching the handlebars and handle grips, and you checked it and you didn't find it? Would that surprise you as far as touch DNA goes?
And James answered that no, he didn't think it would be unusual not to find what he calls trace DNA. That's what's left behind in skin cells when someone touches something. And as far as that DNA found on the child, a lead investigator in this case has already testified he doesn't think it's evidence of a sexual assault, and he says there's not enough of it for investigators to figure out where it came from. Reporting from downtown, Shelvia.
He says he was there, but forensic evidence shows otherwise. About 100 pieces of evidence from the Leicester Street Massacre were tested for DNA, but not one article has the accused killer Jessie Dotson's DNA on it. ABC 24's Kevin Holmes has reaction tonight from Dotson's defense team. Kevin?
Cameron, today was all about biology and the technicalities of DNA. Tonight, defense attorneys are calling this a very important day because they say at least 4 of the jurors have medical backgrounds.
It's their witness to prove and it's their case to prove that this man was involved in this.
6 bodies, knives, a bloody carpet, a shotgun, the victim's clothing.
There's blood all over this house. There's DNA evidence.
None of the DNA evidence matched accused killer Jessie Dotson.
You never found Jessie Dotson's blood, saliva, skin, hair, or sperm on anything you tested regarding these victims, did you?
That's correct.
What we wanted to do is to accentuate that their proof does not back up the state's theory.
Friday served as a science lesson in the Court of Criminal Justice. Prosecutors interviewed forensic scientists from the FBI and from the TBI.
The way hair and fiber examinations can be conducted can be described in 3 steps: collection, identification, and comparison.
We're just beginning. There's still plenty of work to do on this case.
Defense attorneys Marty McAfee and Gerald Skane feel they're off to a good start, especially since 4 of the jurors are nurses and likely know something about DNA.
We set out to find a jury that was going to pay attention to the evidence, evaluate the evidence, and hold the state to their proof.
But when information comes up about unknown DNA in somebody's mouth or in somebody's fingernails or in a part of the house it's not supposed to be, they're all writing it down. So, I mean, they're considering everything.
And so tomorrow, jurors will be right back here. They're expected to hear from Sylvia Braswell. She's with the TBI, and she'll go over ballistics proof. We will hear information about how many guns were used and where each of the victims were shot. Live downtown.
Our big story tonight, the Jessie Dotson trial, graphic testimony coming out of the courtroom. The jury hearing more evidence about the night 6 people were brutally murdered inside a Binghamton home. Hi, and thanks for joining us for WRG News Channel 3 at 6. I'm Omari Fleming. Detectives open up about how Jessie Dotson became a suspect in the Leicester Street murders. All new at 6 tonight, our Candace McCowan has the latest on that case.
It was a short day for jurors at the Leicester Street murder trial. They were only in court for 3 hours today, but got to hear testimony from 2 people. TBI forensic scientist Servinia Braswell took the stand first this morning, giving her analysis of shell casings, guns, and bullets taken from the scene. But it was former homicide detective Walter Davidson that told the courtroom how Jessie Dotson was developed as a suspect.
You know, it was a tough thing to handle, I'll just say.
Davidson told the jury about how at first they were exploring all leads and dozens of Crime Stopper calls. Some of those leads and tips pointed to Jessie Dotson, but Dotson wasn't considered a suspect until several days after the murders. That's when Dotson's nephew, 9-year-old C.J. Dotson, began to feel better and told detectives what happened inside the house.
He said his Uncle Junior was responsible for killing his family and stabbing him and his brothers and sisters.
Davidson told jurors that at the time Jessie Dotson was at a safe house where the Dotson family was being guarded. Davidson said that Dotson was brought in and interrogated. He told jurors it was hours later that Jessie confessed not once, but twice.
He confessed to killing or shooting the adults, and he confessed to stabbing the children. He told that to then Lieutenant Armstrong, and he wanted to talk to his mother, and he told his mother the same, that he did it.
Although the prosecution was done questioning Davidson, the defense will not question him until Monday.
Yeah, is there a day and a half for them to think about it? Yeah, but there's also a day and a half for me to prepare, so I assume that all balances out.
Candace McCowan, WREG News Channel 3.
The trial will start again at 9 o'clock Monday morning. You can watch the testimony live.
In the Leicester Street murder trial today saw the 5-inch knife that had to be surgically removed from a child's head. It was day 6 in the trial of Jessie Dotson, the man charged in the deaths of 6 people, including his brother and 2 young nephews. The lead homicide detective testified that hundreds of cops worked thousands of leads to solve this case. TBI firearms specialist Servinia Braswell testified that 20 shots from 2 handguns killed the 4 adults in the house, a 9mm and a .380.
Would it be possible that one person could do that?
Yes, sir.
While Braswell said one person could handle both guns, the defense got her to admit she could not determine if the killer acted alone.
Is it possible for one man to use 2 guns? Sure. Is that the way it usually happens? No.
Jessie Dotson's demeanor today, more serious than on previous days. The testimony, more serious too.
It was horrific.
Memphis Police Lieutenant Walter Davidson, a rookie homicide detective at the time, described an unforgettable bloodbath inside 722 Leicester Street. 5 children stabbed and beaten. The 3 survivors immediately put under police protection at the hospital.
I didn't want, if we didn't know who the killer was, we wanted to make sure that the killer couldn't come and get the kids at the hospital.
Lieutenant Davidson says the rest of the family was taken to a safe house to protect them from gangster disciples angry they'd been implicated in the murders. 4 days later, the 9-year-old victim, CJ, provided the big break in the case.
He told us who was responsible.
What did he say?
He said his Uncle Junior was responsible for killing his family and stabbing him and his brothers and sisters.
Lieutenant Davidson says Memphis police took Jessie Dotson into custody. And after they played a tape of CJ telling investigators Uncle Jesse did it,
in the end, he confessed to killing or shooting the adults, and he confessed to stabbing the children.
Davidson also said Dotson confessed the crimes to his mother. The testimony wrapped for the day. Dotson's defense attorneys won't get their chance to cross-examine Lieutenant Davidson until Monday.
The jury's been good listening to everything that's happened so far. They know not to make any decisions until all the proof is in, and I'm confident they can do that. They've heard enough to know that there's a lot more coming.
Memphis police did not record Dotson's confession, and the one taped by the reality show The First 48 no longer exists. The presence of First 48 cameras at the crime scene was also brought up today. Lieutenant Davidson told the court, personally, he didn't want the cameras there, but it wasn't his call to make. Again, testimony resumes on Monday.
Moments for Jessie Dotson as his father took the stand in the Leicester Street Massacre trial. The man accused of killing 6 people, including his brother, niece, and nephews in March of 2008, sat in court as his father recalled the last few days he spent with his sons. Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossman has the twists and the turns today from the courtroom. Allison.
One after another, the victims' family members testified about the last time they spoke with their loved ones. The father of Cecil and Jessie Dotson, one a victim, the other the accused killer, offered some insight into what might have led to the fight that prosecutors say led to the murders of 6 men, women, and children. Jessie Dotson Sr. said a fight had been brewing between his sons for some time.
He said wherever they go, whether it's to a restaurant or to a club, he would somehow or another find a way to let somebody in the club or the restaurant know that he just got out of jail.
And he didn't like that.
He said it was making them look bad.
He said he had seen his grandchildren and sons on Saturday, March 1st. He described his reaction when he heard the news.
Just broke down.
Dotson Sr. even talked about a gun that was sitting on the counter in Cecil Dotson's home on Leicester Street.
And so let me move that gun because it's blue and my kids might think it's a toy. And he moved it. And when Junior came in the house, he told Junior, I moved that gun.
This after some heated testimony from the MPD case coordinator on Leicester Street.
Police don't exonerate people. Police charge people, don't they?
No, they exonerate people as well, but it's not my job to provide a defense for your client.
But the defense kept at it. Questions about a lack of Dotson's DNA found at the crime scene.
Let's talk about the semen that was found in the 2-year-old's mouth. Is that unimportant in this case, as it tested?
Right.
Had it tested to Jessie Dotson, would it have been important?
No.
It wouldn't have been?
No.
Attention also centered around the statement from 9-year-old Cecil Jr., the child victim who pointed the finger at Jessie Dotson.
It's fair to say that from the first interview to the very last interview, CJ has given differing versions as to what happened.
That's fair, yes.
But the prosecution countered.
Has CJ ever said from that moment on March 7, 2008, that anybody other than Jessie Dotson is responsible for this?
No.
Also taking the stand today, the mother of Marissa Williams, one of the victims, who's also the grandmother of several of the child victims. We'll hear from her tonight at 6. Live at the Criminal Justice Center, Allison Sossaman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
Happening now, it's week 2 of the Jessie Dotson murder trial, and now family members of both the victims and the suspect are taking the stand.
There's talk about leaving gangs and testimony from a relative who was at the house the day of the Leicester Street murders, but left just before the crime happened. News Channel 3's Stephanie Skurlock is live downtown with the latest. Stephanie?
Well, April, today's testimony got emotional at times, especially when relatives began to take the stand. And perhaps no other time did it get more emotional than the man who is father to both Cecil and Jessie Jr. took the stand to tell the jurors about the day he found out about the murders.
Wherever they go, whether it's to a restaurant or to a club, he would somehow or another find a way to let somebody in the club or the restaurant know that he just got out of jail.
Jessie Dotson Sr. talks about the source of tension between his two sons, Jessie Dotson Jr. and the brother he's on trial for killing, Cecil. Leading up to the murders, his son Jesse was working with him as a painter. They'd all been at Cecil's house that Saturday to watch a basketball game. He told jurors he remembers Jesse Jr. had a gun because Cecil moved it.
Came from behind me and reached over on the counter and said, "Let me move that gun because it's blue. And my kids might think it's a toy."
Also at the house that day, the other brother to Cecil and Jesse. He too saw Jesse with a gun, but a different one.
The gun that you saw him with?
It was black and silver.
When that brother and Jessie Dotson Sr. left Cecil's house, Jesse was still there. He didn't show up to help his dad paint on Sunday, but he came Monday, and he didn't say anything about gangs shooting up Cecil's house. It wasn't until the mother of Cecil Dotson II called family that they knew something was wrong.
I was so nervous, I went over my brother's house, and I was telling him that something wasn't right in my son's house. I said, "Oh, this ain't right." And I was crying on his shoulder. And he was watching TV. And he told me, he said, "Oh, look, Jesse is running across the TV." He said, "Something is wrong." That's how I learned.
Well, Jesse's father says Jesse Jr. called him about a few weeks ago, but before then he hasn't talked much to his son since his arrest. However, I talked to one of the investigators who works with the defense team, and he tells me that whenever it comes to his father, Jesse Jr. gets very emotional. Perhaps that would explain today, while it was difficult for me to tell while his father was testifying on the stand, if it was actually a shadow under Jesse Jr.'s eye, or actually if he shed a tear today. Stephanie Skurlock, WREG News Channel 3, live.
Today, the Jessie Dotson murder trial transitioned from evidence to theories and motives. Dotson's attorneys argue anyone could have killed Cecil Dotson and 5 others in the Leicester Street massacre. Prosecutors say that theory is nonsense. Kevin Holmes was in court for all of it today. Kevin?
Cameron, according to today's testimony here at court, Cecil Dotson was a member of the Gangster Disciples and had at least one run-in with a high-ranking member of that gang. But tonight, one of Cecil's friends and fellow gang members says that is not enough. That run-in is not enough to kill innocent women and children inside 722 Leicester.
Prosecutors began week 2 by showing jurors just how weak the defense's theory is, according to them. For much of the afternoon, this man, admitted gangster disciple Willie Boyd Hill, took the stand.
2-year-olds, a 4-year-old, a 9-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 2-month-old get beaten and stabbed. What kind of violation do you have to commit for that to happen?
I don't know no violation like that.
Because the gangster disciples don't kill women and children.
And the prosecution says if it were a gang hit, the gang would have come prepared.
Would they be heavily armed?
Yes, sir.
They're going to run out of bullets, a 9mm and 380, and then start using kitchen knives on kids?
No, sir.
A gang expert for prosecutors, but not so credible witness according to the defense, although this gangster was full of emotion at times. Defense attorney Gerald Skane says it doesn't take away from the fact that Hill is a 3-time convicted felon. And the defense says what he told police in a written statement
is very much different from what he told this jury.
And you said, what the hell is going on? Did y'all have something to do with this? Where's Doc? Did Doc have something to do with this? Those are the first things that you said.
First thing I think I said, they went too far. Well, Doc, did y'all have something to do with this? At that particular time, if they had anything to do with this, I probably would have went after them.
It's like an admitted gang member that seemed to know answers to some questions and not to others.
The evidence does not meet their theory.
And the trial resumes tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. A woman named Stacey Young, she's currently on the stand. She's friends with Cecil Dotson and Hollis Seals, 2 of the 6 people killed in the Leicester Street Massacre. Live at the Criminal Justice Center tonight, Kevin Holmes, ABC 24 Eyewitness.
A woman dating Jessie Dotson at the time of the Leicester Street murders talks about seeing him at her home right after the massacre. The accused killer's sister takes the stand as well today. She said she was afraid of him long before the murders. Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossman is live with the latest from the courtroom. Allison?
Some very telling testimony today from those who knew Jessie Dotson best, including his girlfriend and his sister. You may remember after the murders, we spoke with Nicole Dotson. She said she didn't think her brother could be responsible for this. That was before Jessie Dotson was arrested. Today in court, she paints a very different picture of her brother. Sheila Jones started dating Jessie Dotson in October of 2007. They met through his sister Nicole, who he moved in with when he got out of prison. Here's a picture of brothers Cecil and Jesse the day Jesse got out.
He came and stayed with me. I didn't ask him to. I didn't want him to.
But he did come stay with you.
Yes, and I was too scared to ask him to leave.
The morning of March 2nd, Jesse came over to Sheila's house. Sheila wasn't there, but her daughter Kiera was. Kiera says Jesse went into the bathroom.
I heard water running in the bathroom. I don't know what he was doing in the bathroom, but I did hear water running.
Later, she said she saw bleach stains on the bathroom rug and a bottle of bleach in the hallway. Kiera's mother, Sheila, came home about an hour later. She says Jessie Dotson was awake in her bed.
Well, he stated to me, ladies don't come in at 5 o'clock in the morning, and that was the only conversation that we had.
Sheila says the day after the murders, Jesse asked her to pick him up on Leicester Street. She says when she got there, she saw cop cars and ambulances surrounding the house. After Jesse was arrested, Sheila spoke to him behind bars.
He told the police that the bike was at my house.
The bike Dotson rode away from Leicester Street was in the shed behind her house. And that's not all Dotson told his girlfriend.
I asked him, why, if he don't know, if he was there, why don't he, help the police with the investigation? Yes.
What did he tell you?
That they got to figure it out.
Late this afternoon, Lieutenant Caroline Mason with the Memphis Police Department took the stand. You may remember she is the one who was featured on the A&E reality show First 48. She's the one who got the statement from 9-year-old Cecil Jr., who is the one at the hospital who pointed the finger at Jessie Dotson as the killer. Kevin Holmes is following that, and he'll bring you that tonight at 10. For now, we're live at the Criminal Justice Center. Allison Sossaman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
No written statements, no audio recordings, and defense attorneys say prosecutors have no case. Today, jurors in the Jessie Dotson murder trial heard from family members close to Jessie and Cecil Dotson. They also heard from Memphis police detectives who stayed in close contact with the surviving victims. Reporter Kevin Holmes is here now with the newest twists in this case. Kevin.
We heard testimony about evidence shredded, family members afraid, close friends of both Cecil and Jessie Dotson recalling the days leading up to and moments after the Leicester Street Massacre.
He moved in with me August 07 after he was released from jail.
And Nicole Dotson says she's been terrified ever since.
He came and stayed with me. I didn't ask him to. I didn't want him to.
But he did come stay with
Yes, and I was too scared to ask him to leave.
Prosecutors say Jessie Dotson had a grudge against his brother Cecil and his entire family. According to testimony, Cecil would try to embarrass Jessie in public, and while Jessie was in prison for second-degree murder, no one would visit him. Memphis Police Detective Caroline Mason recalls interviewing Jessie Dotson days after the murder.
And Cecil introduced him as his brother from prison. He frowned when he said it, when he recalled.
Nicole Dotson also says her brother was acting very bizarre the night the bodies were found on Leicester Street.
Jessie was telling me, don't talk to the media, don't tell these folks nothing, and immediately they gonna blame this on me. These were my exact words to my brother. Why you say that, Junior? I don't feel like they're going to blame it on me.
Defense attorneys say blame can be passed on to the Memphis Police Department for a botched investigation. According to homicide detective Caroline Mason, when the MPD interviewed Jessie Dotson, there was no written statement taken, no audio recording, and the video recording is no longer available.
Are you one of the officers that takes notes?
Yes.
Do you still have your notes from this interview?
No, sir.
They were destroyed.
I shredded them.
Defense attorneys also pointed out secrecy amongst investigators.
Was there a point that you were involved in receiving information along with Lieutenant Armstrong, Chief Armstrong, that there was a decision that you participated in to keep it from Sergeant Davidson? Was that done at any time where information was decided that we will not let the case coordinator in on this?
Yes, sir.
I think it went for the defense as well as it could get. Putting together trials kind of like putting together a jigsaw puzzle. There's still a lot of the pieces that the jury needs to make a decision.
Well, you know what? A major piece of the puzzle takes to stand tomorrow. 11-year-old CJ Dotson. He's one of the surviving children, then 9 at the time. Investigators say there's an audio recording of CJ naming Jessie Dotson, his Uncle Jesse, as the killer in this case. He's expected to be first on the stand tomorrow morning. Live in the studio, Kevin Holmes, CW30.
Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossaman was in court as two kids told two very graphic tales.
First, we heard from Cecil Dotson Jr. He's the oldest of the surviving children. He said he watched as his Uncle Jr. shot and killed his parents, their friends, and then stabbed his siblings and then himself. His younger brother also testified, but he couldn't be as specific. Family members filled the courtroom as the young Dotson children came face to face with their uncle for the first time in years. The judge warned them all this wouldn't be easy.
If anybody can't control their emotions and can't deal with this emotionally, you need to leave the courtroom now.
First, Cecil Dotson Jr. told his horrific tale.
Because he said he's going to kill you and kill you like he did your daddy and your daddy's friends.
Yes, sir. Some family members had to leave after that because they couldn't take it. Defense lawyers asked him about changes to his story.
It's pretty clear that he's been prepped extensively before testifying, but this is the first day we have seen him.
His younger brother Cedric was next. The defense questioned whether or not he should testify.
Before we subject this child to getting up there to cross-examination on unbelievably fanatical, wild statements he has said on tape before a judge, I would encourage the court to have some kind of competency hearing outside to understand the difference between a truth and a lie.
The judge asked Cedric some questions and okayed him to testify.
Tell me what bad happened to you.
Stabbed.
You got stabbed?
Yes, sir.
Okay, where'd you get stabbed?
On my nose, my nose, my forehead, and my wrist.
Okay, and who stabbed you?
Uncle Jesse.
But when it came to cross-examination, there seemed to be more questions than answers.
Did you see your Uncle Jesse shoot anybody?
No, sir.
Did anybody ever tell you that Uncle Jesse has shot people?
No, sir.
Cedric said the adults were stabbed. They weren't. Also,
and there was a lot of people fighting that night, wasn't there?
Yes, sir.
There were some men you didn't even know who they were in there fighting with your dad and his friends. Right?
Yes, sir.
the dramatic testimony continued late this afternoon. We heard from MPD Deputy Director Tony Armstrong. He's the one who got the confession from Jessie Dotson. And we also heard from a very emotional Priscilla Shaw, who's the mother of Cecil and Jessie Dotson. Kevin Holmes is following that, and he'll bring that to you tonight at 10. For now, we're live at the Criminal Justice Center. Allison Sossaman, ABC 24 Eyewitness.
Tonight's top story, the biggest day of testimony in the trial of accused murderer Jessie Dotson Jr.
Today, jurors heard from two of the children who were left for dead but survived the attack that killed their mother, father, and two brothers. Also, a grieving mother was forced to testify against her son, who was accused of killing his brother. Kevin Holmes has been in the courtroom and heard all of the testimony. Kevin.
I got to tell you, today's testimony here at court, emotional from start to finish. We heard from investigators and from family members who identified their own flesh and blood as the killer.
When I first went in, he was sitting at the table, and I got his hands. When I was asking him what's going on, I asked him, were they trying to put it on him? What's going on?
And he didn't say anything. He just held his head down for a while. And when he did look up, he told me he did it. And I asked him, what did he say? He said, I did it, Mama. And then I asked him, but the babies, why the babies? And he said, they saw me.
Chilling testimony from Jessie and Cecil Dotson's mother, and it almost didn't happen. Minutes before Priscilla Shaw was set to testify, the defense filed a motion to suppress her statement.
And I went over to 201 where I talked to Jessie.
Defense attorney Gerald Skane's concern is Memphis police may have sent Shaw into the interrogation room to get a confession on behalf of the MPD.
Of the thousands of people I've represented, Judge, when they actually see their mother, they're usually laughed at. For some reason, this case was different, and Deputy Director Armstrong went and got his mother after Jessie Dotson had told him, I'm not talking to you anymore, and exercised his right to an attorney.
No, I asked him the kids, and he said they saw me.
With pain in her voice, Shaw told jurors about her conversation with her oldest son, Jesse, while he was in police custody, as well as days following the Leicester Street massacre. She described her son's very strange behavior.
Just acted real crazy. Even at one point he said, just bury me with my brother. And he had a gun, and he put the gun to his head, and he went into the bathroom.
Priscilla Shaw wasn't the only one Dotson confessed to. Then homicide detective Tony Armstrong told jurors a similar story. One defense attorney say was never recorded, and therefore memories may not be so clear 2.5 years later.
Deputy Director Armstrong, do you think taking some notes might have helped you remember a little bit more?
You know, I don't know how long I live, but I can almost assure you this is a night that is an investigation I'll never forget. I don't think it's every day that you investigate the murder of 6 people with 3 kids that was supposed to be intended. For all intents and purposes, there was supposed to be 9 bodies in that house, but by the grace of God, 3 of them lived. So I think it's pretty fair to say that I'll never forget this as long as I live.
And tomorrow, jurors are expected to hear from the coroner and from medical examiners as they go over the cause of death for each victim. Live downtown, Kevin Holmes, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
The defense is expecting to have as many as 30 people testify before it's all over. No word on whether Jessie Dotson Jr. is on that list. Stay tuned to Eyewitness News for daily.
He had obvious trauma and swelling to his forehead with a steak knife, part of a steak knife sticking out of his head.
Late tonight, the doctor who performed emergency surgery on the 3 Leicester Street survivors takes the stand. His testimony reminding us why the crime is considered the worst mass murder in Memphis history. I'm Richard Ransom.
I'm Claudia Barr. The jurors sat for hours today looking at the most gruesome pictures yet. Our Tom Powell is live with more on this grueling day in court. Tom.
And Claudia, grueling is in no way an overstatement. What these jurors saw today was downright awful, especially near the end of the day when they saw pictures of the young survivors, the youngest 2 months old, from her hospital bed. Bloody jeans, autopsy sketches, x-rays, just some of the less gruesome images shown in court during a marathon day of medical testimony. At one point, after a juror began to fan herself, the judge made sure the jury didn't need a recess. Defense attorney Marty McAfee.
So we would have agreed to every bit of it that was put on today by stipulation, but instead we got a lot of very gruesome, very colorful pictures that are meant to make sure the jury feels that.
There's no way to tell how the pictures made defendant Jessie Dotson feel, but I can describe how he reacted. He glanced up at the pictures of the wounded children who survived. But when it came to his brother, Cecil Dotson, who he's accused of shooting 8 times, he did not look up at the autopsy photo.
It's a hard thing to see people that you know, people that you care about, in pictures like those. This man's a human being, and he's going to react.
He had obvious trauma and swelling to his forehead with a steak knife.
Surgeon Dr. Michael Mulbauer testified about the survivors. CJ, the 9-year-old found in the bloody bathtub.
He was awake, moaning, but would follow commands.
Then there was the youngest survivor, 2-month-old Sanaya. Mulbauer said she suffered a fractured skull, that it looked like she was hit with a board. Dr. Mulbauer said 5-year-old Cedric suffered stab wounds to the left eye, forehead, and neck. His conclusion about Cedric: without immediate medical attention,
he would have died.
And he says the other two children would have met a similar fate if they didn't get the treatment they did when they got it. And we'd be talking about 9 murder victims instead of...
Prosecution rests in the Jessie Dotson trial. Now Dotson's defense team gets its turn. Their first expert, a world-renowned doctor. The defense paid her to evaluate statements made by the prosecution's star witness and raise questions about the child's testimony. Our Tom Powell spoke exclusively with the doctor and is here with the latest. Tom.
Well, Claudia, the star witness you're talking about was C.J. Dotson, the child who told the jury his uncle Jesse stabbed him in the head and killed 6 others. But the doctor suggested his memory may have been, quote, contaminated.
Correct.
The defense calls Dr. Nancy Aldridge, an expert in child forensic interviews.
This is a world-renowned expert from Atlanta that has interviewed many children in her life, and that's what she does.
Dotson's defense team wanted Dr. Aldridge to interview the 2 surviving boys, CJ and Cedric, before the trial, but she wasn't allowed.
And then when I was not allowed to do that, they asked me to come to watch their testimony.
So she did. She sat in court and watched C.J. Dotson implicate his Uncle Junior, defendant Jessie Dotson.
You saw your Uncle Junior point the gun towards your daddy.
Dr. Aldridge evaluated CJ's testimony for the jury, saying he seemed well prepared.
He seemed amazingly calm in a way to come into the courtroom and to talk about things that was so horrible. And
does that mean to say that you think he was rehearsed?
I think he knew that he was going to be asked those questions and he was prepared. As far as rehearsed, I don't know.
Before trial, Dr. Aldridge listened to several recorded conversations CJ had with investigators, some taken in March, soon after the massacre, others 5.5 months later. CJ's given conflicting statements. Aldridge says his memory could have been contaminated by things he heard.
Tonight's top story at 9. Jessie Dotson took the stand in the Leicester Street murder trial today. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Joyce Peterson. Dotson, a man accused of killing 6 people, including his own brother and 2 young nephews, told the jury, "I confessed, but I didn't do it." Eyewitness News reporter Shelby Dancy attended today's court proceedings and has more on Dotson's testimony.
Dotson was on the stand for a little more than an hour. He was the second witness of the day. He did admit to confessing to police and his mother, but he said on the stand today that he did not commit the crimes. He said he was hiding in a bedroom when the murders happened.
I still told him I didn't do it. That's when he said, "I kill your myself. You cold-hearted, murdering, killing."
Jessie Dotson told a jury police pressured him into confessing to the murder of his brother, 2 nephews, and 3 other people.
Are you telling this jury that when Lieutenant Armstrong pounded on a table and screamed at you, that made you confess to killing women and children?
The prosecution grilled Dotson about his confession to his mother. She listened as he told the court about it.
I stood up and leaned across the table and said, "They trying to put this on me. They trying to make me say I did it." Do you know what she said? Who trying to make you say you did? Tell me so I can get you some help. I need their names. What's their name?
But on the stand, Dotson insisted he did not commit the crimes.
When you told Sergeant Armstrong that you shot your brother Cecil, was it the truth?
No, sir.
Dotson said he was in a back bedroom when his brother and 5 others were murdered. He said he had gone there to make the bed for visitors when he heard gunshots.
It was a girl that was screaming. And when I heard her screaming, I got under that bed.
He said he hid there until the house fell silent, and when he got up and walked into the living room...
Did you think the people were alive or that they were dead?
Dead.
Dotson said he didn't tell police or family about the murders because he was scared of gang retaliation.
If I call the police, I'd be just like my brother.
What do you mean you'd be just like your brother?
I'd be just like him, dead.
Dotson admitted he was in a gang, his brother too, and said his brother argued with a gang member shortly before the murders.
My brother yelled out, "Y'all know where I stay at."
But prosecutors did not let up.
Not even for a 2-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 4-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 5-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 9-year-old?
No, sir.
Not even for a 2-month-old baby?
No, sir.
You don't call the police?
No, sir, I didn't.
Dotson was the last witness for the defense. They'll be back in court Monday for closing arguments. Reporting from the newsroom, Shelvia Dancy, CW30 Eyewitness News.
Jessie Dotson's defense team agrees that putting him on the stand today was a risky move, but they say Dotson wanted to speak out.
Since we first started representing him, he's always maintained that he wanted to tell the jury and tell everybody what actually happened that night. And today he finally got his chance.
Jessie Dotson is being tried for capital murder. Tonight's top story at 9. The Leicester Street murder trial is nearing the end. Good evening and thanks for joining us. I'm Joyce Peterson. Jessie Dotson, the man accused of killing 6 people, including his own brother and 2 young nephews, took the stand yesterday. Dotson told jurors he did not commit the murders. Eyewitness News reporter Jackie Orozco spoke to a U of M law professor tonight about what we can expect in court tomorrow.
The prosecution and the defense will give their closing arguments tomorrow. After that, it's up to the 12 men and women serving on the jury to decide Jessie Dotson's fate.
Solemnly swear the testimony you're about to give is the truth, whole truth, nothing but the truth. Yes, sir.
When Jessie Dotson took the stand Saturday, he finally told his side of the story.
If I call the police, I'd be just like my brother.
What do you mean you'd be just like your brother?
I'd be just like him, dead.
Dotson said he hid under this bed while 6 people, including his brother and 2 nephews, were being murdered. The prosecution drilled him with a series of questions.
What about when somebody was in there pounding those children with boards? You didn't hear that?
No, sir.
Dotson maintained his innocence.
Jesse, did you kill your brother?
No, sir.
Did you kill the other people in that house?
No, sir.
To win the case, University of Memphis law professor Steve Monroy says the defense team only has to prove there is reasonable doubt that Dotson committed the murders.
You know, you rely on the fact that the chief witnesses against him are children, and that children aren't always the most reliable witnesses. They can easily be led. You know, ideas can be implanted in them. You know, suggestions become fact in their minds.
As for the prosecution, Monroy says their case is backed by strong testimony that could convince jurors Dotson is guilty.
You know, children or no children, you know, you've got multiple witnesses, including the mother, including law enforcement, that said that he did it. You know, 2 different witnesses saying that he confessed.
After a 2-year investigation, countless pieces of evidence, and emotional testimony from both sides, Monroy says it's impossible to know what the jury will ultimately decide.
You know, one thing I've learned over the years is you just really cannot predict what a jury's going to do.
Now, there are 3 possible outcomes to this case. Dotson can be convicted or he can be acquitted. There can also be a mistrial if the jury is unable to reach a verdict.
Tonight on ABC 24 Eyewitness News at 5, our top story, the largest mass murder in Memphis history is now in the hands of a jury. Good evening, I'm Dee Griffin.
And I'm Cameron Harper. Jessie Dotson is accused of murdering 4 adults and 2 children and trying to kill 3 other kids. Eyewitness News reporter Allison Sossman has been covering the trial from the start, and she's live downtown. Allison.
We've got some breaking news here at the Criminal Justice Center. We're getting word from the 7th floor that there could be a verdict already in this trial. Now, there's a light that turns on in the courtroom. Either the jury has a question or they have a verdict. And from our crew up on the 7th floor, they say that they're waiting for the attorneys to come back. The families are up there, and they're getting word that this could be a verdict. Of course, today there was closing arguments from both sides. Jessie Dotson, watched the entire time, of course, and Cecil Dotson Jr., the boy who was 9 years old who testified, he is 11-year-old now, he was in the courtroom listening to all of this. So was his younger brother, Cedric. They've been called the heroes of this case. Here's more from today's closing arguments.
The right verdict in this case is not guilty on every charge. And it's going to be the hardest thing you've ever done.
Defense lawyers gave it their final shot, trying to put reasonable doubt into the minds of the jurors. Most of their jabs were aimed at the Memphis Police Department.
And they're too lazy, they're too arrogant to test it.
Gerald Gaines said Dotson's confession was coerced. He says the testimony of 2 young survivors isn't credible.
The desperate times call for desperate measures. So they put up a small child Say, do you remember who did it? Yeah, Uncle Jesse did.
Prosecutor Ray Lapone countered.
And any other verdict than guilty just tells those boys they survived for nothing.
He described the brutality of the attacks.
He turned right here, popped 2 in his chest, and dropped them. He wanted to execute him. He walked up on him with that 9mm and made sure he was dead.
What happened to the children was even worse.
This is something that even a mother can't excuse.
He says the physical evidence is there.
You don't think we have physical evidence linking him to the crime scene? What do you call that bike?
The bike Dotson rode from the crime scene and stashed in his girlfriend's shed, the one cops found after Dotson told his mother where it was. Lapone says the only time Dotson was genuine was when he was talking to her.
The police explanation is ridiculous. The coerced statement is ridiculous. But the one thing in this case that's genuine is his confession to his mother. That was genuine.
And we're hearing it could take about 15 minutes for everyone to reconvene in the courtroom, and we'll make it word if this is in fact a verdict, a very quick verdict. The jury got the case at 3:05 this afternoon. Right now, just 5 o'clock, so 2 hours they've been deliberating. So, of course, it could be a question, but word is that it could be a verdict. So we will keep you posted, and we'll bring you live with the very latest. For now, we're live at the Criminal Justice Center. Allison Sossaman, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
You're right, Allison. The jury deliberating 9 verdicts in this case. This would be an incredibly fast verdict if indeed the jury has made its decision. The jurors were selected from... Tonight's top story, the Leicester Street killer guilty on all 9 counts.
The jury reached a verdict in record time. Emotional testimony from the youngest victims and compelling closing arguments today from prosecutors sealed Jessie Dotson's fate. Joyce Peterson talked with Jessie Dotson's family right after the verdict. Joyce.
If the verdict had been not guilty, Dotson's sister says the entire family would have moved away from Memphis, fearing for their safety. But the special jury from Nashville, after 3 weeks of graphic, gut-wrenching evidence and testimony, came back quickly tonight with a unanimous verdict of guilty.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree of Cecil Dotson Sr.
It took the jury less than 3 hours to convict Jessie Dotson of 6 murders and 3 attempted murders.
We're disappointed at the speed of the verdict. I don't see how they could have looked at everything in that time.
Prosecutors praised the investigative work of the Memphis Police Department, but gave most of the credit to the children who miraculously survived the attacks and testified. They called 5-year-old Cedric and his 9-year-old brother CJ heroes.
He had the courage to come in here and point at his uncle, even with the expert coming in and trying to discount his testimony and all those things. But those kids know who stabbed them.
Dotson's sister Nicole says the family no longer has to live in fear of a man she describes as a monster.
Ranting, raving, mean, evil. I mean, the words that I would use to describe my brother, don't get me wrong. I love my brother because we grew up together. But he's a devil. He's a devil.
What drove Jessie Dotson to kill his brother and 3 other adults in that house on Leicester Street in March 2008 is unknown. How he could stab and beat 5 children, killing 2 of them, is unthinkable. Those involved with this case will never forget Memphis's worst mass murder in history.
Frankly, there's not an explanation for that. I mean, you can study them if you want, but the why, we don't care about the why. We know he did it, and he needs to pay for it.
Guilty of murder.
We also learned tonight the Leicester Street killings aren't just the worst mass murders in Memphis history. They're the worst mass murders in Tennessee history. And this trial, with its heavy security, out-of-town jury, and 2-year investigation, will likely go down as the most expensive trial in Shelby County history. Reporting live in the studio tonight, Joyce Peterson, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
The jury could sentence Jessie Dotson to life with parole, life without parole, or the death penalty. Dotson's sentencing hearing starts tomorrow at 9.
The jury having found you guilty of murder in the first degree of Cecil Dotson, Marissa Williams, Paula Seals, Shindry Roberson, Cecil Dotson Jr. II, and Samario Dotson.
Guilty on all counts. That's the jury's verdict for Jessie Dotson. Dotson was accused in the worst mass murder in Memphis history. Thank you for joining us. I'm Claudia Barr.
I'm Richard Ransom. Today, it took a jury less than 2 hours to reach a decision about what happened more than 2 years ago on a fateful night on Leicester Street.
Stephanie Skurlock begins our Team 3 coverage. She's been following the case since it started and was there when the verdict was read.
We, the jury, find the defendant guilty of murder in the first degree of Marissa Williams.
After 2 weeks of testimony and more than 450 pieces of evidence, the jury in the Leicester Street murder case reached a verdict in less than 2 hours.
The court will accept the verdict of the jury.
The verdict is guilty for Jessie Dotson on 6 counts of first-degree murder for a killing that included his brother Cecil and 2 of Cecil's children. Dotson was also convicted of 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for beating and stabbing his brother's other 3 children. They survived and were in the courtroom when the verdict was read.
They were happy. They were happy that this is coming to a conclusion. They feel like justice was served. And they're happy for CJ and Cedric for what they did, what they had to go through.
There's no murder that's worse than this one. They're all bad, but I mean what those kids went through, and if you look at the injuries, you know they suffered, you know they were screaming.
Dotson showed no emotion as the verdict was read, but his attorney said he was disappointed.
He's a human being. I mean, I can't get into what we talked about, but he wasn't happy with the verdict, but he understood it. And we'll come back tomorrow and address the sentencing.
Dotson's defense team will work to try and spare his life. The jury could give him life in prison with or without parole, or they could give him the death penalty. Stephanie Skurlock, WREG News, Channel 3.
Don't get me wrong. I love my brother because we grew up together, but he's a devil. He's a devil.
That's Jessie Dotson's own sister speaking out against her brother tonight, calling the convicted mass murderer a devil walking on earth. In fact, Nicole Dotson hopes her brother gets the death penalty or at least life in prison without the possibility of parole. Our Tom Powell is live with that part of our Team 3 coverage. Tom?
Well, Richard, I can tell you one thing. Nicole Dotson certainly didn't hold back. She says, yes, she still loves her brother, but she hates what he did to her family. She calls him a monster who should never be set free.
I just want him to pay for what he done.
Nicole Dotson talking about her brother, convicted mass murderer Jessie Dotson.
I don't think he has any remorse. I think he wants people to pity him.
If that's the case, he shouldn't look to Nicole for pity. That's because she says she has none for him.
But he's a devil. He's a devil.
Nicole grew up in the same house with Jessie. She also lived with him before the Leicester Street Massacre. She says he's always been scary, mean, and evil.
What made him so scary? What did he act like?
A monster. The testimony that you all saw at the end on Saturday, that was the Jessie that I lived with for 7 months.
Testimony where Dotson became animated, claiming police coerced his confession.
After I still told him I didn't do it, that's when he said, I kill your myself. You cold-hearted, murdering, killing mother. That's what he did.
Nicole didn't buy Jessie's testimony. Neither did the jury. She says there's no way Jessie hid under a bed, that her brother is a bully who would never hide from a fight.
If I would have heard shots, I would have came out. I would have been dead too. I wouldn't have hid from nothing like that. I wouldn't have let my nephews and nieces be tortured like that.
Nicole believes the young survivors are heroes, especially CJ, who had the courage to sit on the stand, point at his Uncle Junior, and identify Jessie Dotson as the killer.
God, not man, God kept my nephews and my little niece here to tell what happened to them. Because without them, who knows where we would be. Jessie may not even be in jail.
Nicole told me that if the jury came back and decided to let her brother walk, she would have walked right out of Memphis because, put simply, she would have been too scared to live here. She won't have to deal with that, though. As we mentioned, the jury convicted her brother on all counts. Tomorrow, they will start the sentencing phase, the penalty phase, and it is certainly a possibility that the same jury...
Tonight's top story, a mass murderer will die for his crimes.
Jessie Dotson was handed his sentence today by jurors, a decision that was made in less than 2 hours. ABC 24's Joy Lambert was in court. She joins us now with more. Joy.
Well, Cameron, 6 death sentences.
That's what the jury decided for Jessie Dotson. He was convicted yesterday of brutally killing 6 people in March of 2008. Today, family members cried as they left the courtroom. But defense attorneys say this isn't the last we'll hear from Dotson.
They're to be confined until March the 2nd of 2012. And on that day that you receive a lethal injection of drugs based upon the laws of the state of Tennessee, sufficient to cause your death. May God have mercy on your soul, sir.
Those were the last words Judge James Beasley spoke to convicted murderer Jessie Dotson as his death sentence came down after less than 2 hours of deliberations.
When you try a case like this, a verdict like this is a distinct possibility. We knew it from the beginning, and unfortunately things didn't go our way today, and the result is what it is.
Dotson was convicted of 6 counts of murder on Monday. The Leicester Street killings are the worst mass murders in Tennessee history, not just Memphis. Prosecutors called Tuesday's conviction and sentence justice for the family.
Under the circumstances of this case where you have mass murder, all these people killed, women, children, the worst of the worst. And I think that any jury, more than likely, I think will come back like this jury with these facts.
Prosecutors say ultimately in this case, Dotson was his own worst enemy, and they tried on the stand to make that come out.
But I thought, if he's the individual that sliced up children with kitchen knives, there's something inside him that he can't control and turn off, and I knew that I could get there, and that's why I got close to him and then would walk away, and then I got close to him and I kept staring him in the eyes when I did it, and he got upset and couldn't focus on the rehearsed testimony.
Dotson's 11-year-old nephew was one of only 3 survivors that day. He was found with a 4.5-inch knife blade in his head. Prosecutors say his testimony last week sealed Dotson's fate.
When CJ said it was his Uncle Junior, you had to be there to hear that. He was sincere and he knew who had stabbed him.
Tuesday, jurors heard more about who Dotson was, his past murder conviction, and from family and friends who are living through the horror Dotson created 2 years ago. Now, you heard the judge say Dotson's execution is scheduled for March 2nd, 2012. That's 4 years to the day he murdered the 6 people on Leicester Street. That execution date will likely change as the defense moves forward with appeals, and that process has already begun. His attorneys say they will fight for Dotson as long as they can. Live in the studio, Joy Lambert, ABC 24 Eyewitness News.
Jessie Dotson will be back in court next month for his sentencing for the 3 attempted first-degree murders. Now tonight's top story. Leicester Street convicted murderer Jessie Dotson is back in front of a judge. He's sentenced again. He's scheduled to die in less than 2 years for killing 6 people in one of the worst mass murders in Memphis history. 3 children survived that brutal attack. Today, Dotson learned his fate for the attempted murder charges. ABC 24 News reporter Kevin Holmes sat in on the hearing and talked with Dotson's attorney, who says this is not over. Kevin?
That's right. Let's not forget it was just a month ago he was convicted on 6 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to death. But all parties involved say the appeals process could take years. And defense attorneys say there's a small chance, that this death sentence could be overturned.
But I don't think I can tell them that God is in control of it. He will take care of us, and he will take care of Jessie.
Well, that's the same task the legal system faces, taking care of Jessie Dotson. He's on death row, convicted of first-degree murder. Now a judge tacked on an additional 120 years for 3 counts of attempted murder.
In my 40 years of being in the criminal justice system here in Shelby County, I've dealt with a lot of cases. I've seen a lot of cases. Been around a lot of cases. I don't know that anything I can think of is more aggravated than this.
His niece and 2 nephews survived, and some say their testimony is what helped convict them. Still, attorney Gerald Skane,
The fight will come on the appeal.
says the fight has just begun.
This begins a long process. As you guys know, death penalty appeals take years.
Skane says both he and Dotson are optimistic about the appeals process. Neither had much to say during Tuesday's sentencing. They just listened to prosecutors and testimony from the children's grandmother.
They want their Uncle Jesse to tell them why he killed their parents. They loved him, but he did this to them, and now they're devastated.
Prosecutors say today's sentencing provides justice for all victims. It also provides insurance just in case Dotson's death sentence is overturned. That's something Skane and Dotson will work to accomplish over the next few months.
I hope so. These are hard verdicts. They're very hard and they're emotional. As we all saw through the trial and the appeal, will be emotional.
And the first step in the appeals process will be a motion for a new trial hearing. That's set for January 7th, right here at the Criminal Justice Center. Reporting live downtown, Kevin Holmes, ABC 24 News.
The Leicester Street case was on the list of Memphis City Council's unsolved and heinous crimes. Then 9-year-old Cecil Dotson Jr. survived the attack and told cops that it was his uncle who did it. Last month, the surviving children received the reward money for leading police to the killer.